The river was about 700 yards wide at the spot where we crossed. It didn't take long to paddle the boats across, but it seemed like a lifetime. The Germans didn't know we were there for most of the trip across the water. As soon as they found out we were leaving, they really opened up on us with all they had. They were shooting over our heads. The riverbank was a kind of levee. By the time we reached the bank, they started rolling hand grenades down the bank at us. I knew we couldn't stay, so I jumped up and said, "Let's go get 'em!" Every man there leaped to his feet, and over the top we went yelling our heads off and shooting everything that moved. I think it scared them as much as surprised them, but our casualties were light, considering that we all thought they would hold out until the last man. We were all glad when it turned out as well as it did. As I remember, it took us most of the night to clear all the houses and keep the Krauts away from the river to protect the rest of our men. There were a lot of houses burning. It looked like Los Angeles after the Rodney King verdict. Really not much different between watching that on TV and being in a battle in towns with buildings burning all around. The biggest difference is we had no mobs running wild like they had in LA. For some unknown reason, a boy by the name of Paul E. Kahn got left behind. When it got daylight, he discovered just ahead of him were 10 Germans and a machine gun. He jumped up and pulled the pin on a hand grenade. When the Germans saw him, they surrendered. I believe from his description of where the machine gun nest was, it was one that I had butted heads with earlier. I had nearly decided to surrender to them, but decided to make a run for it. With all of the confusion and the gunfire everywhere, it's hard to keep up with all that is taking place. It's not like a movie, where if you don't do it right, you get a retake. We moved on inland to a small town about daylight. It was defended pretty heavily. After a 3-hour battle, we cleared it out. We had to put the reserve platoon out as guard. The rest of us were trying to find a place to sleep. I went in one house, and a man was on a couch, all covered up. I motioned for him to arise, which he did, and when he did, he reached out under the couch, pulled out a German uniform coat, put it on, and raised his hands to surrender. He then motioned toward the couch again, and I looked. His rifle and ammo were under there. We arrived early at the next town. We got stopped by a school building that sat in a town circle. They were using the basement as pillboxes. They could see us from all sides. After being pinned down most of the day, a boy from the heavy weapons platoon and I decided to crawl up the curb and try to get some grenades in through the basement windows. We did it, and pretty soon the white flags started coming out of the windows. I don't remember how many casualties and prisoners came out of there, but I would say 100 would be light. The other man, his name was Fletcher Ford from one of the Carolinas, and I were awarded a Silver Star. This ended the fight for that town. The next town was Gros Garou, with some smaller ones in between. Gros Garou was pretty heavily armed by the enemy. It took us the biggest part of one day and night to clear it and set up a defensive line to keep the Krauts from coming back. We always referred to the German soldiers as Krauts. The German civilians called us swine, meaning pig, but we didn't mind that. Most civilians didn't treat us that bad, because most Germans, as well as everybody else, was fed up with Hitler. I remember in Gros Garou, a diehard man and woman were giving us so much static that I took them and locked them up in a chicken house to keep them out of our way. But in 10 months of combat, I never saw a civilian mistreated as far as bodily harm. There were a lot of them wounded and killed by bombs, artillery, and bullets that were not aimed at them. Our mission was to eliminate the German army and put Hitler out of business, and we did just that. The older I get, the more I think about being over there, not knowing which bullet had your name on it, or which artillery shell would get you, or when you would step on a mine. My brother Arlen and I talk a lot about the war. He and I were pretty close to each other at times. He was in the 8th Infantry Division, part of Hodges' 1st Army. I know they had it rough, because we were, our divisions, side by side a lot of the time. With Gros Garou cleared, we started for Frankfurt, with some small towns in between. Frankfurt had been hit very hard by the U.S. Air Force, which saved the ground forces a lot of casualties. I don't remember how long it took us to get there, but most of the Krauts had pulled out. By this time, the enemy was surrendering or running, or in some cases changing to civilian clothes, or just being another civilian. As far as I know, this never caused any problems. Frankfurt had been a beautiful place. The civilians told us that most of their damage had come not long before we got there. They said the British RAF came in and dropped a ring of flares around Frankfurt. Then the American B-17s came in and really bombed it good. We were in Frankfurt when the news came in that FDR had passed away. That was a sad day for us. I can't remember how long we stayed in Frankfurt. We were there long enough to catch up on some good meals. I went out and found a warehouse full of eggs. I went back and told the captain I needed a jeep for a while. He said okay. I took the jeep, loaded as many crates of eggs as would stay on it, and returned back to the captain. Then he told me to tell the cooks to fix them any way the men wanted them. Most of us hadn't had a fresh egg for almost a year, so all ate well as long as we stayed there. Frankfurt is where we captured the German artillery gun called Big Bertha. It was carried on 2 railroad flat carts. They would run it within range and shoot it at us, but never really causing real damage. It was like the screaming meme. It scared you more than hurt you. The barrel of the gun was big enough so we could crawl up in it with all our gear on. I would say it had to be at least a 30-inch barrel. There were several Russian refugee camps around Frankfurt. We would get food from those underground storage places and take it to them. Frankfurt was a mass of underground tunnels and storage places, as well as wine cellars where they aged champagne and wines. After Frankfurt was all taken care of, we moved to the Ruhr Pocket, where some 80,000 Krauts were holding out. At the same time, they were completely surrounded, so our job was to go up there and start putting the pressure on them to surrender. In making some long moves, we would use captured German army trucks, etc. After putting the pressure on the Krauts, the Ruhr Valley surrendered. When all the Kraut troops were out, it was our job to destroy all equipment and war materials, which we did. We found one supply dump on top of a hill. There were enough trucks, guns, gasoline, ammo, etc. to have supplied a large army. We would push those big trucks and guns over the head of a hauler, then roll 55-gallon drums of gasoline down on them. We would then puncture a drum and roll down and set fire to them. We had some really huge fires. After we were finished for the day, we got us a car, mostly Ford 1936 to 37 models. They had a very small gas tank, but on the back bumper there was a small steam boiler. You could burn most anything in them. When the steam got to a certain pressure, you would use the gas to get you moving, then switch over to the steam and keep moving. They ran about 25 miles per hour. I remember when we first got there, before the Krauts had given up, a boy from Mousy, Kentucky and I got us a gas-powered car, got out, and got lost. We went through 2 German outposts. They didn't try to stop or shoot at us. The only thing we could figure was the fact that we were in a German car, and they thought we were other German soldiers. When we went through the first one, that put us behind the German lines. We were through it before we knew it. After we realized what we had done, we went on another road towards our lines. That was when we got really scared. It could have been they knew they were surrounded and didn't have a chance, but we were scared coming back out. This happened toward the end of the war. By this time, Krauts were coming out with white flags flying everywhere. Once in a while, you would come in contact with a group of diehards. In the final 10 days to 2 weeks, all we did was take prisoners. We moved several times. The longest drive was about 20 miles in one day, all on foot. But for the amount of ground we covered in those last days and the amount of prisoners and equipment we processed, our casualties were really very low. My company was just inside Austria at war's end. I don't know what town we were in. My platoon was holding a hill at the time. Many Germans were coming to surrender. As I recall, it was about noon when the order came to cease fire. We were told to shoot only if we were fired upon or thought we were in danger. Not in my company, but they said 3 soldiers died after the ceasefire was given. They ran into a group of Krauts that apparently didn't know the ceasefire was in effect. They got in a little firefight, and we lost 3 men. All the time I was in the service, except 10 months, I had to pay for toilet articles, cigarettes, etc. But while we were on the front lines or in a combat zone, we didn't have to pay for that kind of stuff. We sent a list every week, and if possible, the quartermaster supplied us every week. The first supplies we received after the ceasefire, we had to start paying. We moved from the Austrian border a week after the ceasefire to a town called Hingersberg, Germany. There we took on the job of occupation forces. The hardest part of the occupation was some knucklehead put in effect immediately after the shooting stopped that no soldiers were allowed to speak to a German except those doing so in line of duty, which would be very seldom. I think we only stayed there a few months until we started for the USA. The house that my platoon was using as our quarters was owned by an elderly lady. At least, I think she owned it. She was the only one there for the time we were there. One of my men, named Konopasset, decided to get civilian clothes so he could go out in public with this German girlfriend. Her brother had been killed, so she fixed him up with some of his clothes. They had just left her house, and I ran into them. He really did some tall begging for me not to turn him in. He would have been in big trouble if I had. He would have been tried for desertion, which could have gotten him the firing squad, or life in prison, or 10 years, depending on if they considered the fact the war was over. I remember while at Hingersberg, there was an old, skinny, sickly-looking horse in a field. The Germans got permission from the army to butcher it. All the people in the neighborhood gathered together and slaughtered the old horse. Each person got a portion. When they got through with the butchering and everybody left, there was no sign a horse had been butchered. They really cleaned it up. The lady whose house we were in got part of the head for her share. I don't remember how long we stayed there after the horse butchering, but the lady was still making soup over the head when we left. It is really sad to see how they ate that old, sick horse. I have said it many times. A family of 4 Germans could live off the waste of a family of 6 Americans. Same as the soldiers, we wasted more than they had to survive on. Hingersberg was a very nice little town, very clean and neat. Before we moved to Hingersberg, our company was selected to be the honor guard for some part of the peace treaty talks. I believe it was between Russia, France, England, and the United States. Our kitchen personnel went with us and acted as servants. One cook was named Little from down south. One of those Russians looked exactly like Stalin, so Little asked him for his autograph. The Russian signed it Joseph Stalin, but we never knew for sure if it was really him. At Hingersberg, we were taken to a theater building and debriefed. We did this for about 2 weeks. Then the point system came up, and they sent all the men with enough points over to the 3rd Division, and sent all their men that didn't have enough points over to us. We stayed while the 3rd Division all went home, and were discharged. We stayed there as occupation troops for another 3 months. Then we started the long journey home. We rode the boxcars that were used in World War I. They were called 40 and 8s. That meant they could carry 40 men and 8 mules or horses. We must have ridden that train for a week, before arriving at Camp Lucky Strike, France. There we got American money for our French francs and German marks. We were there about a week to 10 days, got all our gear checked and replaced, then boarded a boat for the good old USA.